everyone. Welcome back to Carrie's Corner, day 17, I think it is, of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, illustrated by Eric Kincaid. With Frog watching over my shoulder, we're going to continue the chapter. Like summer tempests came his tears. He slept till a late hour next morning, and by the time he got down, he found that the other animals had finished their breakfast some time before. The mole had slipped off somewhere by himself without telling anyone where he was going. The badger sat in an armchair reading the paper and not concerning himself in the slightest about what was going to happen that very evening. The rat, on the other hand, was running around the room busily with his arms full of weapons of every kind, distributing them in 4 little heaps on the floor and saying excitedly under his breath as he ran, "Here's a sword for the rat, here's a sword for the mole, here's a sword for the toad, here's a sword for the badger, here's a pistol for the rat, here's a pistol for the mole, here's a pistol for the toad, here's a pistol for the badger," and so on, while the 4 little heaps gradually grew and grew. "That's all very well, rat," said the badger presently, looking at the busy little animal over the edge of his newspaper. "I'm not blaming you, but just let us once get past the stoats with those detestable guns of theirs, and I assure you we shan't want any swords or pistols. We 4 with our sticks, once we're inside the dining hall, why, we shall clear the floor of all the lot of them in 5 minutes. I'd have done the whole thing by myself, only I didn't want to deprive you fellows of the fun." "It's as well to be on the safe side," said the rat reflectively, polishing a pistol barrel on his sleeve and looking along it. The toad, having finished his breakfast, picked up a stout stick and swung it vigorously, flattening imaginary animals. "I'll learn them to steal my horse," he cried. "I'll learn 'em! I'll learn 'em!" "Don't say learn 'em, Toad," said the rat, greatly shocked. "It's not good English." "What are you always nagging at Toad for?" asked the badger rather peevishly. "What's the matter with his English? It's the same what I use myself, and if it's good enough for me, it ought to be good enough for you." "I'm very, very sorry," said the rat humbly. "Only I think—" There's the pictures. "Only I think it ought to be teach 'em, not learn 'em." "But we don't want to teach 'em," replied the badger. "We want to learn 'em. Learn 'em, learn 'em, and what's more, we're going to do it too." "Oh, very well, have it your own way," said the rat. He was getting rather muddled about it himself, and presently he retired into a corner where he could be heard muttering, "Learn 'em, teach 'em, learn 'em," till the badger told him rather sharply to leave off. Presently the mole came tumbling into the room, evidently very pleased with himself. "I've been having such fun," he began at once. "I've been getting a laugh out of the stoats." "I hope you've been very careful, Mole," said the rat anxiously. "I should hope so too," said the mole confidently. "I got the idea when I went into the kitchen to see about Toad's breakfast being kept hot for him. I found that old washerwoman dress that he came home in yesterday hanging on a towel horse before the fire. So I put it on, and the bonnet as well, and the shawl, and off I went to Toad Hall as bold as you please. The sentries were on the lookout, of course, with their guns and their 'Who comes there?' and all the rest of their nonsense. 'Good morning, gentlemen,' says I, very respectful. 'Want any washing done today?' They looked at me very proud and stiff and haughty and said, 'Go away, washerwoman. We don't do any washing on duty.' 'Or any other time,' says I. Wasn't I funny, Toad?" "Poor frivolous animal," said Toad very loftily. The fact is, he felt exceedingly jealous of Mole for what he had just done. It was exactly what he would have liked to have done himself, if only he had thought of it first, and hadn't gone and overslept. "Some of the stoats turned quite pink," continued the mole, "and the sergeant in charge, he said to me very short, he said, 'Now run away, my any good woman, run away. Don't keep my men idling and talking on their posts.' 'Run away,' says I. 'It won't be me that'll be running away in a very short time from now.'" Uh-oh, he's giving something away. Look at that picture. "Oh, moly, how could you?" said the rat, dismayed. The badger laid down his paper. "I could see them pricking up their ears and looking at each other," went on the mole, "and the sergeant said to them, 'Never mind her, she doesn't know what she's talking about.' 'Oh, don't I?' said I. 'Well, let me tell you this. My daughter, she washes for Mr. Badger, and that'll show you whether I know what I'm talking about, and you'll know pretty soon. 100 bloodthirsty badgers armed with rifles are going to attack Toad Hall this very night, by way of the paddock. 6 boatloads of rats with pistols and cutlasses will come up the river and land in the garden, while a picked body of toads known as the diehards or death or glory toads will storm the orchard and carry everything before them, yelling for vengeance. There won't be much left of you to wash by the time they're done with you, unless you clear out while you have the chance." Then I ran away, and when I was out of sight I hid, and presently I came creeping back along the ditch and took a peep at them through the hedge. They were all as nervous and flustered as could be, running all ways at once and falling over each other, and everyone giving orders to everybody else and not listening. And the sergeant kept sending off parties of stoats to distant parts of the grounds, and then sending other fellows to fetch 'em back again. And I heard them saying to each other, "That's just like the weasels. They're to stop comfortably in the banquet hall and have feasting and toasts and songs and all sorts of fun, while we must stay on guard in the cold and the dark, and in the end be cut to pieces by bloodthirsty badgers." "Oh, you silly fool, Mole," cried Toad. "You've been and spoilt everything." "Mole," said the Badger in his dry, quiet way, "I can see you have more sense in your little finger than some other animals have in the whole of their fat bodies. You have managed excellently, and I begin to have great hopes of you. Good Mole, clever Mole." The Toad was simply wild with jealousy, more especially as he couldn't make out for the life of him what the Mole had done that was so particularly clever. But fortunately for him, before he could show temper or expose himself to the Badger's sarcasm, the bell rang for lunch. It was a simple meal, bacon and broad beans and a macaroni pudding. And when they had quite done, the Badger settled himself into an armchair and said, "Well, we've got our work cut out for us tonight. It will probably be pretty late before we're quite through with it, so I'm just going to take 40 winks while I can." And he drew a handkerchief over his face and was soon snoring. The hard-working Rat at once resumed his preparations and started running between his four little heaps, muttering, "Here's a belt for Rat, here's a belt for the Mole, here's a belt for the Toad, here's a belt for the Badger," and so on, with every fresh item he produced, to which there really seemed to be no end. So the Mole drew his arm through Toad's, let him out into the open air, shoved him into a wicker chair, and made him tell him all his adventures from beginning to end, which Toad was only too willing to do. The Mole was a good listener, and Toad, with no one to check his statements or to criticize in an unfriendly spirit, rather let himself go. Indeed, much of what he related belonged more properly to the category of what might have happened had I only thought of it in time instead of 10 minutes afterwards. Those are always the best adventurers, and why should they not be truly ours as much as the somewhat inadequate things that really come off? Look at Mole listening so intently to the Toad tell his story. The next chapter is The Return of the Hero, Chapter 10. When it began to grow dark, the Rat, with an air of excitement and mystery, called them back into the parlor, stood each other up alongside his little heap, and proceeded to dress them up for the coming expedition. He was very earnest and thoroughgoing about it, and the affair took quite a long time. First there was a belt to go round each animal, then a sword to be stuck into each belt, and then a cutlass on the other side to balance it, then a pair of pistols, a policeman's truncheon, several sets of handcuffs, some bandages and sticking plaster, and a flask and a sandwich case. The Badger laughed and said, "All right, Ratty, it amuses you and it doesn't hurt me. I'm going to do all I've got to do with this here stick." But the Rat only said, "Please, Badger, you know I shouldn't like you to blame me afterwards and say I had forgotten anything." When all was quite ready, the Badger took a dark lantern in one paw, grasped his great stick with the other, and said, "Now then, follow me. Mole first, 'cause I'm very pleased with him. Rat next, Toad last. And look here, Toady, don't you chatter so much as usual, or you'll be sent back as sure as fate." The Toad was so anxious not to be left out that he took up the lowly position given to him without a murmur, and the animals set off. The Badger led them along by the river for a little way, and then suddenly swung himself over the edge into a hole in the river bank, a little above the water. The Mole and the Rat followed silently, swinging themselves successfully into the hole as they had seen the Badger do. But when it came to Toad's turn, of course, he managed to slip and fall into the water with a loud splash and a squeal of alarm. He was hauled out by his friends, rubbed down and wrung out hastily, comforted and set on his legs, but the Badger was angry and told him that the very next time he made a fool of himself, he would most certainly be left behind. So at last they were in the secret passage, and the driving out expedition had really begun. It was cold and dark and damp and low and narrow, and poor Toad began to shiver, partly from dread of what might be before him, partly because he was wet through. The lantern was far ahead, and he could not help lagging behind a little in the darkness. Then he heard the rat call out warningly, "Come on, Toad!" And a terror seized him of being left behind, alone in the darkness, and he came on with such a rush that he upset the rat into the mole, and the mole into the badger, and for a moment all was confusion. The badger thought they were being attacked from behind, and as there was no room to use a stick or a cutlass, drew a pistol, and was on the point of putting a bullet into Toad. When he found out what had really happened, he was very angry indeed, and said, "Now this time that tiresome Toad shall be left behind." But Toad whimpered, and the other two promised that they would be answerable for his good conduct. And at last the badger was pacified, and the procession moved on. There they all are, getting ready in their nighttime outfits so they blend in. Only this time the rat brought up the rear with a firm grip on the shoulder of Toad. So they groped and shuffled along with their ears pricked up and their paws on their pistols, till at last the badger said, "We ought by now to be pretty nearly under the hole." Then suddenly they heard, far away as it might be, and yet nearly over their heads, a confused murmur of sound, as if people were shouting and cheering and stamping on the floor and hammering on tables. The Toad's nervous terrors all returned, but the badger only remarked placidly, "They are going it, the weasels." And that is where we're going to stop, where the weasels are having a party in there in the tunnel underneath. We will start tomorrow in the middle of the return of the hero and see how they save Toad Hall. See you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye. Bye. See you tomorrow.